specifically?
Dr. Crone's 88th birthday was yesterday, and since he traveled all the way from Virginia, the very least we can do as a city and as a county is show a little hospitality. So we're going to go sing happy birthday and have a little cake. So everybody proceed over to the...
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Norman. Happy birthday to you.
I'm really
Blow it out like a 6-year-old.
Yep.
Yeah. I can't eat the whole thing.
No, you don't. We're testing your lung power right
Yeah.
now.
That's great. Thank you.
So blow out.
Blow out your candles.
Yeah, she forgot about candles.
Yep.
Okay.
Take a deep breath.
Oh, that's great.
Very good.
Dive in, people.
I think it was not so much grant, it was, they might have got some grant, why not to build their dispatch. But we pay.
Yeah, so we pay a lot, but we are the major
Everyone?
payer of this.
We're going to get started now, and I think it might be a good idea since we're a more intimate group, a smaller group than expected. If we could group together at maybe 2 tables or so, and that'll make it easier for questions and to discuss ideas back and forth. So everybody wants to consolidate maybe into tables 1 and 2, and maybe table 5 if we need it. And my girlfriend Kathy will stay out the front desk for another 15 minutes, and she will wait for the stragglers, and then she's going to come in and take
You want us to
notes.
move over to 1? Where are we moving?
I don't know, that's what I'm asking, where you want us.
Yeah, I thought we were moving.
Another person?
That was the person we were waiting for.
I think the very first thing I want to say is thank you. I'm Councilman Chris Darczynski, City of Lincoln Park. Been on City Council since April 6, 2015. Seems about 300 years ago, in dog years when you think about the amount of work that it takes to turn around a city. I came to this kind of in a reverse process. I've actually been politically involved at all levels and active for about 35 years before I decided to get involved in public service. So my strong point and my passion has always, ever since about 1979, has been economics. Although I fundamentally believe that we wouldn't have a nation without such things as the First Amendment and the Second, 9th, and 10th Amendments, unless in a free market society, unless you have actual economic empowerment, and not in the abstract term, but where a chance where people can actually have, where people actually own, where everybody owns. Actually, I'll go back a little ways. That it goes all the way back to the British philosopher John Locke, who was the kind of the father of what was then called liberalism, and what today we would call classic liberalism. And he simply came up with the concept that every individual should own the fruits of their labor. And but this is in the 1400s, and this is this is at a time in human history where such a concept was absolutely radical. But it's the crucible of everything. In Wayne County specifically, we have four critical issues that I've been able to boil down to what we all have to face the most. Number one, of course, is poverty. And it's again, I think to the media it's some kind of abstract term, and maybe to the average politician out there it's even abstract. But in Wayne County, it's very real, and it's personal. I've never shied away from where I come when it comes to the idea of poverty. My mother was in poverty. And that was due to a lifelong mental illness. That's a component of poverty that's probably overlooked. I never see it in the media. My twin sister, God rest her soul, she suffered from mental illness and she was in poverty. And I put that out there because, again, I'm never shy about saying that poverty affects everybody. And up until, I think it was November of 2004, I had exactly $1 to my name before I was able to find a job and start turning my finances around. And I mean, literally, when I got my first paycheck at my new job, I had $1 left. So when I talk about poverty, I don't have to talk about it in the abstract. I can talk about it in a very, very personal sense. Number two, as far as the problems that face Wayne County overall, this is actually starting to turn around now, and I'm very very, very hopeful. But I think at the household level, for the last 3 generations, maybe even 3 generations, and I look at a generation as every 10 years, we've gone through 3-4 generations where education just hasn't been valued properly at a household level. But as I've seen dynamics change now, I see that finally starting to turn around. So I think we're at the beginning of actually getting a handle on, because I talk to teachers all the time and with our own superintendent, and just actually having the household involved in education. So hopefully that is one component that we're finally starting to turn around. Number 3 is the one that we all struggle with, and that faces Wayne County is, our infrastructure. I mean, well, what's the number? If we had $2 billion, that might take care of half the county. So Macomb County is probably another $1.5 billion. I think the number 4, and this might be the thing that we can actually start working on here today, and that we've worked on a little bit in the past with the pre-conference meeting, is the idea of getting the proper leadership together to work on actual big ideas. Poverty is a big problem. Economic revitalization of a county and of a state, and for that matter, for an entire nation, it's a big problem. You have to have a big idea, and it'll take a lot of core leadership to push this idea of the Capital Homestead Act forward, and all the laterals that can be folded in. So when I start off by saying thank you, I say that in the sense of Harry Truman, one of my favorite presidents, and definitely his one of his famous sayings that that decisions are made by people that show up. So you are the people that showed up here today. It's very significant. So 7 years ago, 7.5 years ago, I was trying to put together a National Gold Commission to bring together all the political parties, academia, bankers, captains of industry, everyone. I was trying to put together a National Gold Commission and look at, okay, we've got worthless currency out there, and how do we change this entire dynamic, and what would a new gold standard look like? And so after I contacted about 50 or so think tanks, policy centers, and so forth, I happened upon the Center for Economic and Social Justice, and Dr. Kerwin picked up the phone, and we started talking. And I said, I'm looking at putting together a National Gold Commission, and I goes, because what we have right now is not going to work as we head into a new economy. And Dr. Kerwin and I started talking that day, and we've been talking for 7 years now. And when Patricia Kraus, who preceded Tom Carnes as mayor, when she got elected mayor, I said, I know this was in 2011. I said there's this guy in Virginia at the CESJ, and they've got some brilliant economic ideas that are quite different, very unique. But I want to start working on getting that information here. So Pat Kraus, God rest her soul, she was on board from the beginning, and it took it took 7 years, but we're here right now. And so I can bookend that as to where you actually start with things. By education, I pretty much bridged the gap of economics, and I started off studying engineering and architecture. So two conversations come to me a very long time ago when I was studying engineering. Our professor said, how do you paint a bridge? And so, then we also put together, okay, this is the plan on how you paint a bridge and how you close off this section. Here's the entire engineering plan. He says, no. He goes, how do you paint a bridge? He goes, you put plans together, but how do you paint a bridge? And he looked at us all and he says, you just start. And so I always go back to that conversation. There goes my name tag. You all know me by now. So then about 4 years ago, I made a new friend, Brad Coulter, when he was emergency manager here for 18 months. And the day after the 2016 election, he was showing me around Matrix Human Services. They are the main provider for Head Start in the city of Detroit. And Brad Coulter now serves as CEO and president of Matrix Human Services. And so when he was showing me around, and he was telling me about a new business incubator that they were developing in the Osborne, neighborhood area, and and when he explained it to me, I goes, that's a fabulous business incubator model. And he looked at me, he goes, it's just people, and that's why we're here today, because we are just people. I'm actually going to transition over to past this one page here, and as I look at where we're heading with the economy and what we're coming out of now with a technology-based economy and going into actually an information and data economy, this is something that I think is going to be unique within society. That's going to actually change society itself. There's very few nations around the world that actually can dig into this from the very beginning. And I see the Capital Homestead Act as being part of this entire new economic dynamic because it is so different, and because it's organic and it starts and it helps right at the very point where economics has to help, and that's at the bottom. So a small little sliver here of economic history, and then I'll take my economic professor cap off. So I'm just going to go back about 1,800 years to. I actually thought that joke would work better. In the year 200 AD, the Chinese were the first one to actually come up with really good printing blocks for letters. This is very significant in human history because now for the first time you're able to mass stamp individual letters and words, and that's information getting out there. But the real change for human history when it comes to information, data, and economics is 1439 when Gutenberg invents the Gutenberg press. So who would have thought that this goldsmith from Germany would revolutionize everything? But for the first time in human history, you're able to actually democratize information, and so books are no longer just these very strange, odd rarities that only the super wealthy and the aristocrats can have. Now books are available within a 100-year period. Within a 100-year period, into the mid-1500s, there's 200 million books in the world. So all this information is now out there, and people are able to read, and formal education starts. Before the 1860s, the idea of children going away to a college was, again, just up there for the aristocrats and for the elite. So I see what's going on right now with the way information and data are actually becoming part of our currencies, that we're at that paradigm shift right now. And the point where this should start is where it's needed the most. That's why I decided to bring together leaders from all over Wayne County, school board level up to the federal level. Everybody hear the same information at the same time, because we're going to do this. This economic shift is going to happen. What's happening now with the economy and how it develops and how it changes and evolves, this is no less than the Gutenberg press and the way that changed information for humanity and therefore changed humanity. So it's better to be involved in that change at the very bottom than to not be involved. I think I've given everybody enough of my economic professorship. I'm going to bring up our city manager, Matthew, and he will introduce Dr. Kerlin, our keynote speaker from the Center for Economic and Social Justice. And you should know that his daughter, Dawn Brohan, has been the communications director for the last 30 years with CESJ, an all-volunteer think tank. There are 600 think tanks in America, and the CESJ works on all volunteers. So everybody, Matthew Koppler.
Thank you, and good afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce the guest speaker today. Norman Kerlin is a lawyer, economist, and president of the Center for Economic and Social Justice. He was Louis Kelso's Washington-based political strategist for 11 years, following years of work in civil rights and the war on poverty. Dr. Kerlin was described by the New York Times in January 1974 as a one-man lobbying organization for Kelsonian ideas, after he and Kelso persuaded Senator Russell Long to champion legislation to promote employee stock ownership plans, or ESOPs. Business Week described Kerlin as the resident philosopher of ESOP in the Capitol. He has authored numerous published writings on all facets of the Kelso system of economics, including A New Look at Prices and Money in the Journal of Social Economics, Curing World Poverty, The New Role of Property, and Capital Homesteading for Every Citizen. Dr. Kerlin also serves as Managing Director of Equity Expansion International, Inc., an international banking firm for the 99%. Among the expanded ownership models he designed was the first bank-financed 100% leveraged ESOP buyout for all employees of Mid-South Building Supply in Springfield, Virginia, as well as the first ESOP in a developing country, which created a Workers' Shareholders Association for 600 workers of the Alexandria Tire Company of Egypt. In 1985, President Ronald Reagan appointed Dr. Kerlin as Deputy Chairman of the Bipartisan Presidential Task Force on Project Economic Justice, formed to promote Kelsonian reforms in U.S. assistance programs to developing economies. With that,
Thank you.
Dr. Kerlin.
Thank you for the introductions. Let me say that I'm here because I think from here we can change the economic conditions not only in the state of Michigan, but as a start, it will change other states that we're working with to change America. So the ideas are not yet ready because we don't have leadership yet in Washington who are ready to enable everyone to be an owner. Our slogan, just so you know what you can simplify everything we're doing, in a simple four-word slogan: own or be owned. And I think that for most people, if they think about it, if they were educated about what can be done so that everyone could become an owner, we'd have new leadership. And we'll be discussing this in session one. We'll just talk about the general ideas, define terms so that we understand that. So we call that a new paradigm for a new solution. And then the second session will be, where will the money come from? So you can begin to see, how do we change the money system in a practical way that would enable everyone to have an equal opportunity to become an owner, not necessarily equal results. because we'll never have a perfect system. And the third session will be creating a model of green growth, green finance, and citizen ownership in Michigan. What is it going to take? We have a group here who are going to be helping to change not just America, but the world. If I can convince you that this is practical, it's realistic, it isn't being taught, it should be taught at the highest levels of academia, in all the law schools, in all the schools of political science, social science, in engineering too, because they have to understand how the creativity of people, of all people, can be developed to the fullest extent. There isn't anyone who wouldn't like to do work that they love. And I love this work, so and I love the opportunity to be here with you. We call something called the just third way. Let me define what the just third way is. You have an idea called communism, which is where, if you read Karl Marx, you find out Marx said, you can summarize his entire philosophy in the Communist Manifesto in a single sentence: abolish private property. Okay? And so he had 10 points on how to do that, and much of the world have, without recognizing it, the tax system. Marx wanted everything to be owned by what he called the dictatorship of the proletariat. So the state would be the owner. And everyone, whoever ran the state, would control everyone's life. Because the nation state is not people. It's a social tool. It was created so that, if you go back to the Constitution of the United States, an imperfect system from the beginning, but much greater than any system, political system in the world. And if you look at the Constitution, it says not the state creates the people, it says we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. And then 2 words. What are the purposes of the state? The words establish justice. And I have to say I was fortunate to have studied in one of the finest law schools in the world. And you study law, but they don't say anything about justice. And if you don't come in there understanding what it means, then you go out. Lawyers are the architects of the system of contracts, etc. This is unfortunate. So we must come to understand that justice, in order to have justice, it has to be focused on the empowerment and dignity of every human person, every child, every woman, and every man. That's what justice is all about. There's a spirit there, it's special. And economic justice, I never understood until 5 years after I got out of law school and working for the government. I never could define economic justice except redistribute through the state. It was wrong, but it was a guaranteed annual income, provide everybody a guaranteed income. And that's the best I could come up with. But that isn't what economic justice is. So let me define what I learned. This was, I learned this because when I finished law school, I worked in the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. At that time, education was all part of welfare and health, etc. in one department. This was, I came in at the end of the Eisenhower era, just as the Kennedy John F. Kennedy was going to be coming in. And I then looked at issues of education. How do you finance education? How do you, a major issue was segregation. And for many reasons, I'm very opposed to segregation, because I really believe if we think about it, there's only one race. It's called human. We're all human. And that's important for seeing that we have to think together. So economic justice, which I'll go into here in the first session, will be made up of 3 principles. And I can state them very simply. And I learned that after I quit the federal government in '65. They were developed by a man named Louis Kelso, who had written a book to say to Marx that he agreed with Marx that concentrated ownership was bad, monopoly capitalism. As a matter of fact, the word capitalism was not invented by owners of capital, or those who control money. Marx, the socialist, invented it. When you think about it, let me just mention why you want to think about that word. Because capital are not people. Capital are things. They're the robots, all the machinery, the structures, the land. These are necessary for the production of wealth. And so, as I thought about, Kelso called this book The Capitalist Manifesto. It was written in 1958. I didn't hear about it until 1965. Kelso was also the inventor of the employee stock ownership plan before the law said he could do it. Because in U.S. law, if the laws don't prohibit an idea, you can go ahead and do it. That's what he did. He was very inventive. He headed up one of the top finance law firms in San Francisco. He's a very bright guy. And anyway, we'll go into him and what he added. He not only added the idea that every person should be an owner, as the opposite of what Karl Marx. So he and one of the leading philosophers in America, who was a socialist before he heard of Kelso. His name was Mortimer Adler. If you know about the Great Books programs, that was Adler. He was the senior editor of the Encyclopedia Britannica 3, and in the Encyclopedia Britannica, there's something called the Syntopicon of Great Ideas. He was the founder of the great books clubs around the country. And he heard Kelso's idea. He challenged Kelso. Started reading Kelso. He suddenly said, I want to write, we will be co-author the book, the book, which you call the Capitalist Manifesto. And incidentally, those books, the 2 books that Adler and Kelso wrote, are available at our website, and many articles and videos on the Just Third Way. So, but the concept, and Don will signal, because I can talk for 4 hours on this subject. I love this subject, and as I say, I'm very proud to be here. But anyhow, the Just Third Way, and I'm going to go more deeply into the principles of economic justice. I'll just name them here and then go in a little bit deeper. One is called participative justice, the idea that every person should be able to participate in the production of wealth, either through their labor, but also if they can acquire property, also with the earnings of the property. It's called profits. So he saw that it didn't have to be concentrated. You had to make it into a universal human right. And it is under the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It says every person has the right to own property. personally and in association with others, no country in the world yet fulfills that basic fundamental human right. And so it's ownership of yourself and ownership of things. Yeah, I will show it to you. Then how do you distribute? Well, Marx, according to Marx, you would distribute through the state. Everybody would be a worker for the state. So whoever controlled the state, which is a very legitimate monopoly, the monopoly over violence, it can kill you. It can throw you into jail if the leaders, if those who run the state decide you're running against the grain. So the principle of how you distribute is a simple one. They call it distributive justice. A lot of people use that term to mean distribution according to need. No, because that's distributive charity and it's a good thing. But it isn't distributive justice. Distributive justice would be you distribute according to the value, the market value of your labor. Some people are going to contribute more valuable labor than others. But also to get distribution according to what's left over. And in this city, in this area, let me talk about, give you a quote before I go through this, by a person, Walter Reuther. I worked for Walter Reuther after I left the government. It was called the Citizens Crusade Against Poverty. It had all the civil rights leadership. It had, Reuther was the chair. You had the head of the United Steelworkers Union, and they all were there to keep the poverty program in Washington, to keep it on the right and narrow and doing what's right as a critic. And I was their director of planning, and I had already heard of Kelso's ideas. So it's unquestionable. I brought Kelso in before 1,000 people in a meeting in Washington, and he just said, he just offered a resolution that the group should study it. And unfortunately, the head of it, the executive director, liked our ideas. He was the one who Dick Boone, who was a descendant of Daniel Boone, and he was former chief of the sheriff's office in Chicago, in that county. And Dick liked our ideas, so he let me go and talk to people all over the country about the ideas. But in any event, Walter Reuther must have picked up on that. In 67, he testified. He said, if the workers, if you democratized ownership and everyone would be able to own and got their gains from the bottom line, profits, it wouldn't increase costs. So that in the world market, we don't have to increase costs. If you want to be a net exporter, you deliver, but not be very careful of raising labor costs. But if the workers could get their gains from the bottom line, it wouldn't go into cost, because profits are only determined after the company sells whatever it has to sell. And if you're competing with China, for example, where their labor costs are much less, it gets very difficult. And so America, which was once a net exporter, is now a net importer. And China owns a lot of the U.S. debt. But anyway, let me now turn to, this is in the preamble, as I said, that's the quote that we should be thinking about. We want to have a more perfect union. If we want to move from the people now who are arguing with one another, can't come together and unite. We want to unite America. There isn't a united America. So how do we unite them? Well, here's Bucky Fuller, who was the founder of the icosahedron. Bucky was one of the giant thinkers about, in terms of the physical changes that would take place. And he just said, we're called to be architects of the future, not its victims. But we're leading. America is moving toward victimizing too many people. And that's the reason for the disunity. And this curve here is a curve showing the population of the world when you had very, very primitive tools. You step out of the cave, this is thousands of years ago, but the tools were pretty primitive. And then eventually you had animals helping people, and they're inventing. But the real change came about the time of the formation of America. Why? Because suddenly what was happening when America was formed, the steam engine came in to displace people. And then you had many, what you're seeing, those lines there, and you have a chart that we distributed, but it shows the various things that have occurred to increase the productive level. So now the population is changing from a couple 100,000 people in the world to 7 billion people in the world. How do we eliminate poverty in America? Well, we have to worry about poverty everywhere, because the cause of war is often as a result of economic issues. So I'm just showing this. And now, who owns? Well, this is just showing the corporation. 10% own 90% of stock, and the rest own very little. 90% own, but this is interesting. The top 1/10 of 1% of Americans own more than the bottom. If you look at all kinds of property, land and other things, that the 1/10 of 1% own more than the bottom 90% combined, and the bottom 50% of Americans own nothing. They owe more than they own. They're dependent either on welfare, or they're dependent on charity, or they're dependent on any way they can get it, or they're dependent on consumer debt. Well, we're going to show you how you can move from dependency on consumer debt to having capital debt, capital credit, insured capital credit that will enable every citizen to become an owner as you grow the economy. And I'll show you the numbers beyond that. The moral basis of the Just Third Way, again, to repeat what I said before, is the dignity and empowerment of every human person. And now, Kelso developed what he called binary economic theory. And binary economics differ from what's taught in the universities, because the university says that all production, they call it labor productivity, as the ability to produce more and more is turned from people to the tools that they have, the energy slaves, as robots who are coming into existence today. As I understand it, according to the Washington Post, that there'll be a loss of 70 million jobs to be replaced by robots in the next 13 years. I can't say that those figures are good, but it's something to think about. And the same thing, artificial intelligence. You now have people going through law schools, and they, in order to get a law degree, it could cost them up to over $1 million in borrowing. And you see what's happening? Students can't. Those who have borrowed that are not paying because they can't afford to. Lawyers, for example, the artificial intelligence will do the research for the big law firms, that law school graduates from the top schools used to do. So even there, it's a problem how you're going to learn. You're going to get an income, but we're going to show how everybody can get an income from these changes. If you own the robots, you can get the earnings from the robots. So Kelso divided, whereas most economists say everything is labor, they talk about the labor productivity has increased. It isn't the labor, it's the technology that's produced, or the capital inputs, the things. So the ideal system, and this goes back to somebody, Jean-Baptiste Say, a Frenchman, who years ago, about the time of Adam Smith, was saying that the purpose of production is consumption, and you can't consume unless it's produced. So you've got to somehow reconcile that, but it isn't being reconciled in a world that thinks that everything is produced by labor. It's not true. So that's an important fact to keep in mind. And now, he developed these three principles of economic justice. And I have to say, I wish I had heard of these ideas before I met him, because as I was mentioning, I was for redistribution through the state, which is not the best way. The idea is participative justice. That's the input principle. We're now thinking in terms of systems. So the input principle is to be able to make inputs from both labor and from capital. And then, to a market system, the workers, or those who are employed in the private sector, the productive sector, that's not government workers. You see, it's the ones who are producing our consumption goods. So the income from, and that would include, under the Kelso thing, all workers. Workers for social organizations, workers who are working for education, workers who are working for government would have another way of getting their retirement incomes and incomes while they work, as an addition to whatever they're getting paid today. Nothing would be wrong with that, because you'll see what the result would be. But anyhow, so that would be a perfect system. But nothing, no system that human beings can create will ever be perfect. So then, this is not out of Kelso, but a priest, Father William Ferree, who used to head up Dayton University, came up. He became one of the world scholars on the subject of social justice. Well, why social justice? Because you got to get the feedback of the problem, and then people have to organize and correct the flaw. And this will, of course, be always, and nothing that I talk about today will ever be a perfect system, but it will eliminate poverty to a large extent, and we can handle the minimal as you reduce the level of people who need redistribution, or the cost of Social Security. Social Security has no assets behind it. It's a pay-as-you-go system. But we can solve that problem, and solve the problem in the beginning the way through the welfare system. It can be done, and but gradually, as people get incomes from ownership, they will have power and incomes, much more than they're getting today. And they will be more unified. Now, I talk about the 4 pillars of building a just economy. And 3 of them, the conservatives will say, oh, we all agree about those 3 principles, but they never talk about the first one, expanded capital ownership. Although I have to say that there was a conservative, his name was Ronald Reagan, and he discovered Kelso while he was a governor of California, and he started writing articles for the national press, etc. Gave a speech to the Young Americans for Freedom back in 70, I think it was 70, let's see, that was 77. He gave a speech on the Kelso idea. And then when he became president, if you go to our video section, you'll hear the speech by President Reagan when we delivered a report from the Presidential Task Force on Project Economic Justice to apply these ideas in Central America and the Caribbean for another purpose, so that if America's the model, Central America, the Caribbean, all of Latin America and other places where people become migrants, come into America because they want that, these countries will also buy the idea if America leads the way. This is in Africa too. And I spent some time in South Africa before apartheid ended, and I took people heard about ESOPs, and they came to me from Anglo-American Corporation in De Beers, and they asked me to take them around to employee-owned businesses. I took them to one in Cleveland, which was then a model, Fastener Industries. The leader was a great leader. He passed away, Rich Bernanke. But in any event, they liked it. And so I got invited to South Africa, and they were ready to offer the largest gold mine in the world, the Val Reef gold mine, to the workers. And so I had the union representatives as well as the people from Anglo-American and De Beers, and they gave me the numbers, and I showed how it could work. And everything worked out. And then I met with the head of the union, a man named Cyril Ramaphosa. Some of you may have heard the name. Cyril Ramaphosa listened, he seemed to be open, but then when the press in South Africa picked up, this is before Mandela was released, and he got nervous because the press had picked up on the ideas. For whatever reason, he's now president of South Africa, incidentally. He's the new president of South Africa. He could have done something, and I had support from throughout the population. The press was favorable, but that doesn't matter. We have to look at the future, and I think South Africa, Nigeria, a number of other countries, Zimbabwe, I've met with leaders who were part of the old system, the colonial system. Was it Monsignor Ndabaniya Sithole, who was the real leader when they got rid of colonialism, but then he got isolated by the new president, and he came here and he wrote a book, Secrets of American Success, and in that he was talking about the work of what we were doing as the way to save all of Africa and develop Africa, the poorest countries in the world. And Ndabaniya Sithole was one of our great friends. As a matter of fact, he was at Dawn's wedding many years ago. In any event, expanded capital ownership is a key. But limited economic power of the state, yes, that is a key, because the power over the state and political organizations ought to be the people. And so the people, the government should be dependent on the income of the people, because it's providing services that are very important. Regulation, to make sure that justice, to resolve conflicts. So the state is important, but instead of the people being economically dependent on the state, you want to make the state dependent on the income of people. Everybody, to be able to afford to do that. And to say private property, most people don't understand what private property is. We have to educate people to what it is. It's not the thing you own. It's the rights and powers and privileges you as an owner have. And if you don't have it, and it's the right, as I say, of control, and everybody would rather control than be controlled, or at least participate, or second, the right to the profits. Now, it's also in the state of Michigan. There's a court case back around 1905, Henry Ford, it was Ford versus Dodge versus the Ford Motor Company. And they screwed up or I shouldn't say that. The law of property, Ford came in, this was around 1905, beginning of the Ford Company, and this is a decision made by the Michigan Supreme Court. And it said, God said, Henry, you're not giving us our share of the profits. This is the same Dodge who started the Ford Motor Company, or the Dodge Motor Company. He said, oh, Don says I got another 5 minutes, so I will try to summarize this in this session. God said, if you want to grow, issue new shares, and I'll consider whether I should pay for them. But Ford only wanted to keep the profits in the company so that his share would get greater, and he didn't want to sell shares. But Dodge said, wait a minute, this private property means I have the right to the fruits. If I own 70% of an apple tree and somebody else owns 30%, do I have the right not to give them their percentage of the fruits of that apple tree? You see, and this is corporate law got messed up all over the world. That now through the corporation you don't have to give people the vote, and you don't have to give people the right to their share of the profits. This is very basic, and Kelso solved that problem. And then a free and open markets, it's the most democratic way because everybody's vote counts. You may not want to vote to buy something, or you may be willing to pay more, but what's called the market price is really the consensus as to what it can be, and you have to accept the market as the most effective way of determining. Okay, now this is in session 2, but anyhow, here's how I wanted to start. Session 2 is, Bucky said, our challenge is to make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation and without ecological offense, and this is very important, the last, or the disadvantage of anyone. To me, this is the way you can have not just a revolution of ideas, but this is the way to make the world work. I just consider that very important at this time. So we'll continue now after the questions. Did I regret that the time? Oh, great. Going to trolls and chill out stuff. Do we have any questions so far? And the next session we will talk about where will the money come from and what is money. Sure.
So maybe I missed it. I didn't hear in looking at the outline. Green. What was it? Green growth and green finance.
Oh, okay, yeah, green growth. And, well, it's the difference between growth of the kind that has an impact on the climate, not just in this country, but all over. And how do we grow the new technologies, particularly the energy technologies, so that, let's say that Michigan wanted to really have something they could export to the world. Okay, let's look at those new energy technologies that are evolving. So you don't need the fossil fuels. You don't need natural gas. You use the solar energy. You're able to take out of solar energy, and there's plenty of that, out of the hydrogen in there, and convert that into a new energy source. And they're already talking about, I've seen the climate change people. They're saying that they want it green. Okay, what that means is they want to get rid of they haven't talked about what we would propose, not only what they say because of health conditions, but energy now from the technology is down to 9.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And by the way, Bucky Fuller would make the kilowatt as a standard for under the money system, so you can measure what money should be. Right now, there's no measurement of money. It used to be assets behind money. It's supposed to be assets that because money is something you use to make exchanges between people, and both sides have to feel that it's fair, or else they won't enter into a contract. So all contracts are based on a form of money that's made up of promises as to the value of what one gives and the other gives, and that becomes called a just deal.
We're going into the next session.
Yeah, I'm going into the next session.
Could I just make a little
Yeah.
addendum to Norm's definition of green growth? We're also looking at a balanced economy. The problem where there is great concentration of ownership and income is that eventually you're not going to have a broad dispersion of consumer power, which is going to affect how much producers are able to produce and sell to markets. So the notion of always balancing production and consumption is going to depend on how most people are going to earn their income. And if labor incomes are being threatened by the advent of automation, then you have to figure out how will the ordinary person produce their own incomes in the future, and that's where capital ownership is crucial. So when we say green, it's not only the energies, but it's also like a healthy ecology that you always have balance within the system.
Right. The people who are looking at the climate you not only have 9.5 cents per kilowatt hour, which is competitive, but you can make it even cheaper than that. You see, as you develop, if we did what we did during the war, where under the Manhattan Project, we brought the best engineers, the best scientists together because we were worried about Nazi Germany developing an atomic bomb. And so that was called the Manhattan Project. Well, we need a Manhattan or maybe a Detroit project to say, let's do the same thing, let's develop those technologies. We know how to produce and manufacture. We can create a lot of jobs in producing the energy technologies for the sale throughout the world, the most advanced, but even improving on them so we get the cost down. I'm hoping that I'm answering your question. If not, I could say more.
Oh, the green finance, he didn't finish that.
The green finance is, we're going to talk about finance, where it comes. What did Kelso add to that? There was the second book which you can get from our website. It was called The New Capitalist. Again, I don't like the term capitalist, but Kelso stopped using it because most people turn off when they hear that. And I call it the just way. The second book was called The New Capitalist, but the subtitle tells you everything. It was a proposal to free economic growth from the slavery of past savings. In other words, you're going to hear when we discuss the monetary concepts, it's not past savings, it's future savings. So that you create, what you have to have is bank credit, insured bank credit, so that, let's say, $7,000 a year to every citizen, like the vote, but this would be for every child, woman, and man, every American, or every citizen of any country. And that would be paid for, the way the money would be created. Right now, money has no assets behind it, government debt. So the more that the federal government goes into debt, it's now $63,000 per citizen. It's much more than that when you take Social Security, projections of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Well, those promises were met. We want to keep those promises. Okay, they were met. They told people that there was something behind it, but there is nothing behind it. No assets. Your Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system. Right now, behind the money is government deficits. What happens is the Treasury Department issues more federal bonds, and it becomes the Federal Reserve creates money to buy those bonds, or China buys those bonds, other countries buy the debt of the United States. We're going the same route as Greece was. Greece went into bankruptcy. This country, before that happens, we have to start thinking, getting new leadership, being open-minded, and we'll go into the strategy of how to get there in the third session. But I want to, in the second session, are there any other questions?
Yes, I think there's another question.
Please.
Yeah, you had mentioned that you wanted Michigan to join other states that you've shared this with.
Right.
So who are those other states?
Okay, Connecticut, right, yesterday before leaving here, I got a call from Dave Walker, who is running for governor of Connecticut. And Kelso and I had met with him, and I met with him later. He was the comptroller of the United States, comptroller general for many years. So it's both under Democrats and Republicans. Trusted by Congress when he made a recommendation. But anyway, we met with him, and it was, he didn't argue against it. He read Kelso's stuff and just held off. They said, Norm, I want to meet with you on, when's it, May the 15th? Yeah, the week of May the 15th. So he is running for governor of Connecticut. Connecticut is in bad shape. Hartford became bankrupt. The state had to bail out Hartford. Okay, this used to be the insurance capital of the world. But people leave now Connecticut. There was an article on Thursday, this past Thursday, the lead editorial in the Wall Street Journal was on how bad Connecticut is. Well, I know that those same problems are in Detroit. Maybe so it isn't something, and there also, so Connecticut, I have a group there, one who headed up the school system in Hartford, another was a woman who is a union organizer for government and teachers unions. She's the chair of a chapter, CSJ chapter there. She's terrific, and both of them are terrific. And then one of the people in that group, Russell Williams, was also a guy who, did you get in touch with the person running for lieutenant governor of Oklahoma?
Oh, Anastasia Pittman.
Anastasia Pittman, who came out.
Lieutenant governor.
Yeah, she's running for lieutenant governor. She loves these things. So, you know, we could turn to her because she's also relating very closely. She not only comes out of the civil rights movement, but she also is close to the Indian tribes in Oklahoma. So she's very enthusiastic, and she was in touch with this fellow, Russell Williams, came out of the NAACP in Connecticut with one of the leaders. So he met with David Walker before he called me. And so this was great, you know, coming here and hearing that we got a governor ready to run on this thing. I think that's big. If you got Connecticut, Kentucky is another group, and then California. And I could see where we might be able to get the governor of California, Brown, to get behind this. He's an open-minded guy. He may be so. And the people who would be selling him are people at Stanford University who are promoting the green revolution. They're leaders, national leaders here. So there are people who are beginning to open their minds. Okay, So this was, any other questions? I'm sorry. Okay, then let's go into the second session.
I think we're supposed to give people.
Oh, 10 minutes, right.
We have
If you guys are.
yeah, don't get so close to the microphone. I'm an old karaoke singer. We have a 10-minute break before the second session, so we will break.
Let's start session 2. I think it'd be a good idea for everyone to think about what problems you see as not getting the most out of Wayne County. What kinds of problems? I'd be very interested to hear what each of you might say you think are the primary problems that you would want to have addressed. Okay? You have
Infrastructure.
infrastructure. Good. That's good. That's a good.
I'm sorry. I agree with Councilman Higgins. Infrastructure is like the top thing here.
Good. Good. That's good. A third. Okay.
For me, economic development, jobs.
Okay. Let me write this
I'm
down.
ready.
Yeah.
Economic development, but also access to core services.
Access to.
Core services.
Core
that
services.
includes education, recreation,
Perfect.
education opportunities. It's all-
Right. Great. Great.
I guess my observation would be cooperation with the local union, or the local union, the local
Cooperation
elected
with the-
officials. In other words, the county is supposed to be our rep. They're supposed to be servicing the community. That's how the structure works.
Right.
The community's at the lower level with the residents, and then the community goes to the county goes to the state, yada, yada, all the way up the ladder. And if the county is not servicing the communities in any way, shape, or form, or communicating with them, then they're doing a disservice to their constituency, which is us, as the client, which we are, so.
And is this because the county doesn't have enough money?
No, it's an arrogant attitude. It's an attitude
arrogance.
that we are above you because we're so large and so the thing that we drive the agendas and we drive the services, and if we don't want to give you it, we simply tell you, no, we're not going to give it to you. And that's a long story, history with before the previous administration, but it still continues on.
Right.
You know.
Tell me about who you represent so I can.
I represent the citizens of Lincoln Park. I'm a council
Lincoln
person.
Park.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
That's my position, my elected position.
Okay.
Yeah.
But so it's a question of arrogance, and it's people are not listening.
Well, again, it's a service. If I come to you, and if you've been in the service industry, and I come up to you in any way, shape, or form, you provide a service. Your product is not a widget, your product is service. You're doing
Right.
something for me.
Right.
And if I go to the county as an elected official, they provide, like we're talking infrastructure, they talk about core, that's what they're supposed to provide. That's their mandate, that's their charter to all their communities. And they are paid to do that. We all give them money, and they get money and grants and all that. And they have the infrastructure, meaning they have the appointed and elected official to do that. That's what they're supposed to do. That's their primary, that's how they exist. And if they don't do that, then they're not fulfilling their, if you call it their charter, their mandate, their service. And as a customer, that's what, I don't have a choice of going to another county.
Right.
That is my, that's not like, I don't like Ford Motor Company, I go to Chrysler. You can't do that. You're stuck with the county.
Okay. Are you talking about the political leadership in the county, or are you talking about the people who work, let's call it, I don't want to use the term bureaucrats, but people who are civil servants, those who are being paid to deliver those services?
Well, a little bit of both, because the civil servant still is dictated by the bureaucrat, and the bureaucrat controls the civil servant.
Yeah, that's right.
So, in one hand, it might be one, and on the other hand, it might be one is driving the other.
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of how I answer that question.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. And what would you add?
Well, I'm from education, so obviously education is always good, but infrastructure is a key piece. Like even the road structure, if the road structure isn't proper, our buses fall apart.
Yeah.
That's the problem that we've been
True.
having recently, and we are having to spend more money on buses and less money on books and other things for the students
Yeah,
to get them there, because where we live is in a rural area and
yeah,
the roads are bad.
right. Now, if the money were available to correct the infrastructural problems, the bad roads and have to be repaired, I mean, is there a plan on how to approve it? Is there an amount of money that's needed to do that in order to make the county more efficient, better service? Is there anybody who could say, here's what it's going to cost us if we were to have, do we have planners in the county who would be able to say, this is what we would do if there was the money?
I imagine, I mean, they have the, again, that's on this level up here, and they take care of a lot of communities, so I have to say, without knowing personally, yeah, they'd have to have somebody like that,
Right.
because they control the roads, they have the Wayne County Road
Yeah.
Commission, what you're talking about.
Right.
They plan, when they resurface something, they do the planning, the engineering, the carry-out, they do the maintenance on a regular basis, and that, so you'd have to have a planner, because they gotta survey the road, make sure they get the permits from the state, and yada, 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 so
Right.
you'd have to have somebody like that.
Okay, but what if,
If I may add,
Sure.
Southeast Michigan Council of Governments. Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, called SIMCOG,
Yeah.
has done all of that data, all that research, those numbers, those figures
Okay.
are available actually for the public to even, see.
Okay,
If you
so
want to
you-
know what the cost is
Yeah.
for Wayne County or Monroe or
Yeah.
If
Livingston,
if you're
it's
talking
there.
about infrastructure
Yes.
in Wayne
Yeah.
County,
Okay.
Yeah, through asset management and,
Yeah.
there's the, now I can't remember, I think it's is it Pacer? PASER that does the analysis on your roads and you rate it. So
Okay.
that's where all that information comes from. It's available.
You're right.
let me ask the question. If money were available, interest-free money was available, how would it be paid back? If you could get whatever that dollar is. But obviously, that money is not yet there. And
When you say interest-free dollars, to make infrastructure improvements?
yeah, that's what, yeah,
Okay.
infrastructure.
Interest-free.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah, because we'll talk about that where credit can take place, but that would include infrastructure. Highway, as a matter of fact, the whole highway system in the United States needs a source of doing it, but it also needs a source, if it's going to be done on credit, that you could repay it. You see, otherwise, if the money isn't in hand, it seems to me, it's common sense, that if I offer you a way that would be interest-free money through the local, they'd add service costs, obviously, and there'd be a risk of, maybe a small fraction, but you'd have to come back and say, okay, if we could get that money, so we improve the infrastructure, how are we going to repay that if it came in the form of a loan? That's what I'm asking. I don't know.
Probably the simple answer is not even simple. It just is what it is. It's through taxation.
Yep.
It's going to be a bond, it's going to be
Right.
this, it's going to be that.
Right.
Ultimately, we have to go to our constituents, and this is
Right.
where it's going to land.
Exactly, so that, okay, because that's the answer. The answer on infrastructure is you have to go to the citizens, and they have to be able to afford to pay in the future whatever charges are necessary to pay off that loan. If the local banks say, that's a good idea, we can get the money, and I'm going to talk about where it would come from, through your local banks. And they get a service charge for it. So whatever that would be. And also, the only other cost that I could see would be a charge on the risk of that the citizens are going to have the income willing and able to repay, to pay something in the form of a tax for the benefits that they would derive. If you can't get them to agree, then it won't work, because you would have no way of paying it back unless you figured out a way that your citizens could have more money. If it's part of a bigger plan to bring industry into Wayne County that could succeed in selling things to the world that aren't being produced, that becomes part of the growth that we talk about. Then citizens would say, you're telling me that I can get $7,000 a year in credit, even though I have no savings, and I don't even have a job now. But if you can show that citizen, wait a minute, just as Henry Ford was smart enough to figure out that there are new industries that people here could be working at, if it was introduced, maybe not in the city, but at some place, abandoned, there might have been brownfields. If you read what we're trying to do in East St. Louis, you'll see that there was a once great, there's an article here in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, which should be in your batch, to see what we're doing. Only problem, and we're able to get the state to agree to citizen ownership of these infrastructures. And anything else, we were cleaning up the brownfields. We had NASA Power Technology people out of Ohio coming in with the most advanced system. It would take the brownfields, turn it into methanol, feed that into advanced fuel cells, and then you got energy, you got water, you got heat for manufacturing or whatever other thing. So it's something can come out of this. That technology still exists. But I'm saying what I would recommend is look at what kinds of technologies is the scientific and engineering community able to offer us that isn't being produced sufficiently for the world. You see, it's a political problem. People say, oh, we're not going to pay for these climate change problems. But as I say, it's just common sense to me, if there's a way to get energy cheaper, everything moves with energy. You can't, whether it's household needs or production needs. If you get the costs down to that, and then be able to get jobs and people getting their increase, whatever the market rate is for salaries and wages, whether it's janitors or chief CEO of a company, whatever they are, don't worry about that. It's got to have that. But they can get any increase in the future out of the bottom line. It won't go into cost. And they can be more competitive. While other countries are going to be forced to figure out how do we follow what you're doing. See, that's why I'm here, because I'm hoping that out of this will come a handful of people who would then say, why not? What do we got to lose? Should we put some time? Should we invest in this? Should we try? Should we be the source? Should we be offering a model? Is there any reason that this state, not just Wayne County, and because I would shoot for making it a state thing, not just Wayne County and Detroit. I think you could build new cities. That would make sense. That would be more energy efficient. Now in teaching, that's another matter. I know one of the biggest problems, I think I mentioned that Hartford was going bankrupt because the pension costs could not be met with the tax revenues that they were getting for education. And so the state had to come in and bail out Hartford from going into a bankruptcy court. But this is also a problem all over the country. And I think Michigan is one of the places that's a key. I think there are other states. As I said, Connecticut, I think we're going to get Connecticut. Because if you get leaders who, are willing to listen as you're listening, they have no, if they're real leaders, it makes sense. Who's hurt? You see? Nobody's hurt. That's what a great idea can be. I wouldn't be spending my life since 1965 saying this is a solution. And it isn't because it's my idea. But if you hear somebody's eureka, and you say, why didn't I think of that? It's your eureka after that. Nobody can monopolize the truth. Something that makes sense. And that's where education comes in. Because if these ideas are meaningful to you, why can't kids be taught that? See, I think kids understand ownership when they first enter into the public school system. And I use the example, if a kid has a favorite toy, and one of the neighbors takes that toy and wants to take it home, what does the kid say? It's mine. Right? So that shows you property is part of our system. You see? It's part of human nature. And now, you want to say we ought to talk about, now where's that money going to come from? And that's what we'll talk about now. So we can show you it's not that complicated. Once you understand that money is only a way of measuring value. Let me give you Louis Kelso's definition of money in one of his books. He said money is not a part of the visible sector of the economy. People do not consume money. Money is not a physical factor of production, but rather a yardstick for measuring economic input, economic outtake, and the relative values of real goods and services of the economic world. Money provides a method of measuring obligations, rights, powers, and privileges. It provides a means whereby certain individuals can accumulate claims against others, or against the economy as a whole, or against many economies. It is a system of symbols that many economists substitute for the visible sector and its productive enterprises, goods, and services, thereby losing sight of the fact that a monetary system is a part only of the invisible sector of the economy, in other words, the social tools, and that its adequacy can only be measured by its effect upon the visible sector. And that was in one of his books. I can't argue with that. You can't eat money, but it's there. Why do we have a yardstick for measuring distance? Why do we have a time system that measures time? Why not a system that could measure money? And I love what Bucky Fuller said. The kilowatt hour, the price of a kilowatt hour. And if you can get the cost of producing the kilowatt hour down, it just means that prices are going to be lower. Okay? So that whatever people are getting as their income, they're going to be able to buy more during the process of accumulating enough so that when they retire, they don't need Social Security, they don't need welfare, they don't need charity. You see, and that is, finally, there was a Pope who said, money, he said, charity is the soul of justice. but it can never be a substitute for justice. So if what we're talking about in terms of justice is right, then we have to see that the system is not providing the level of justice which can be achieved if we, together, only when the people see it and say, we want that change. And that's why I'm here, hoping that here would be almost the ideal place, that is the state of Michigan and Detroit and Wayne County. We have few people representing the population, and I'm hoping that out of that will come people. That's what I was going to discuss in the third session, of what is it going to take for the system, if you think it makes sense, and it becomes your idea, not just my idea, and in that way, any leadership has to listen to you. It's the people. I know that this is how segregation, nobody thought that you could change the segregation laws back in the 60s, in the early 60s. They thought it was impossible. Well, what happened? Okay? People got together in a peaceful way. This is where Martin Luther King, he said this beautifully. He said, the kingdom of brotherhood is found neither in the thesis of communism nor the antithesis of capitalism, but in a higher synthesis. It is found in a higher synthesis that combines the truths of both. The problem of racism, the problem of economic exploitation, and the problem of war are all tied together. These are the triple evils that are interrelated. I think he's right. And I think anybody who studies what happened in war, I happen to have been in the Korean War, so I can say that there's got to be a solution. There's got to be a solution in America so that we don't go the route of China, where a party is in control of all the people, and you either go along or we throw you in jail or kill you. You know, same in North Korea. But there's a solution there. And if America buys what we're talking about, we can change North Korea. They're going to have to change, because we can. Where will the money come from? That's what the second session is all about. So anyway, you have a list of these, so that what it shows is if everybody got $7,000, which is the amount of new capital formation, including infrastructure, that could be paid for out of future income. So it's credit. Credit's only a set of promises. And you have to look and say, well, you know, there's a risk that you can't do it, but if you've got a growth economy, you know you can do it, because there should be, if you add new industries in here so people can get jobs, they're going to have incomes, because they're going to be able to sell to the world. So you start out with a, Dawn, do you have the, no, I'm saying, I want to get, the effect is this. That child born today, by the time they reach 65, would have close to $500,000 after tax in assets, providing them about $50,000 in income. I'm on Social Security. My wife's on Social Security. She gets a little bit, but I'm saying we get a lot less than $50,000 a year. Okay? So, and from the time that child reached age 65, there'd be $1.6 million in income over and above what they would get from their jobs or any other source, whether it's welfare or whatever.
It's dividend income.
Dividend income. That's what this is all about. Is it practical? I know it's practical because we're doing it for workers in the private sector. getting the money out of the system to be able to enable workers to buy out the company completely and pay for it out of the future profits. And they don't even pay corporate taxes because all the future profits are paid out. They're tax deductible at the corporate level and then taxable at the individual level. So you'd have additional tax incomes, you see, to pay for the services, to pay for the infrastructure, etc. See, there's a solution. So if you look at the chart, it shows what somebody could have at age 18 when they're first entering college and how much they would get 21 and so on. It's compressed. If you want to see all the years on our website, you can get the full range of what they can accumulate and earn as a result of the just third way.
Maybe just mentions the assumptions, because we've tried to be very conservative in doing these projections. So are you able to see?
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is
Oh,
the glasses.
yeah. Okay. It's a one-time rate to get the loan, and they have 2%. These are the assumptions. One-time risk premium of $4.50. Oh, the first was $2.
No, that's okay.
2%,
Uses glasses.
or 4.5%.
The idea was really we can get into the charges that would be discounted from the amount of credit people would
Yeah.
get, and we were being
Their costs.
very conservative, meaning we judged the risk premium to be 4.5%, which is more than generally. But the point is, in the assumptions, starting from age 0, and then $7,000 worth of capital credit per person available each year, which means that's all based on the size of the growth of the economy and the number of people. And if you had a growing economy, it would be more than 7,000. But we're looking over the lifetime of a child born today, and assuming the economy didn't grow at all, it was just where it is today, it would be $7,000 worth of capital credit. And out of that, Norm will explain that this is newly created credit coming through the local banks and the regional Federal Reserve Bank, which was given the power to create money. Now, in terms of the other assumptions here, it's also looking at the repayment of the loans are pre-tax. So what normally would be looked at as a return on investment typically looks a lot lower than what we were projecting. I think it's 15%. And the reason we're projecting higher than usual is that ROI is generally looking at after-tax return on investment. So if you're paying off your loans using the full stream of untaxed profits, you're going to be able to accelerate the payment on your loan. So those are just to give you some basic numbers of what we were looking at. And the point was to stay conservative, not to build into this that we expect the economy to grow, so greater credit.
Yeah, it could be. You see, the economy in the new when the New Deal was passed, where you had double-digit rates of unemployment from 1930 to 1940. Okay, a lot of jobs were lost. People had to depend on the government to redistribute or put them to work in different jobs. From 1940 to 45, we had growth rates with taking 13 million of the most able-bodied workers out of the workforce to fight in the military. You had double-digit rates of growth. You had women going to work in the factories, elderly, people too old, going to work in the factories to produce weaponry. Why? Why was there double-digit rates? For a simple reason. You want to keep it in mind, because there was customers. Who were the customers? The federal government, to buy all the war equipment it could, and so you had these growth rates. Well, the same thing could be done in peacetime. You see, with this kind of credit. You don't need the government to do it, other than to ensure that promises could be made at the commercial bank level. Banks used to be there as the source of capital credit. Now it's consumer credit. That's what they do, the commercial banks. That's most of what they do. You want to get them to create jobs and create new industries because, again, I repeat, it's important. You can only get new industries if, in fact, you're going to have customers willing to buy whatever you produce. And I say, focus on energy is the way to do it. New energy sources. That's really advanced. And as I say, the scientists have done a great job in getting the cost down to 9.5 cents a kilowatt hour, but then they show what the health costs are as a result of climate. It's not just in the United States, all over the world. So that, again, if I were recommending to entrepreneurs, okay, if you're willing to allow the shares to be owned by the people, and you'll get the money needed to do infrastructural improvements or to produce new tools or products for the global market in a competitive way, everything will work. And I say to resist that is to maintain the disunity in America and the disunity among nation states. America, you have a chance here in this state to get behind a model that the world will know about. As soon as you don't have to spend money. One of the state representatives here told me, Norm, I think don't try to get anything done nationally. You'll never sell it nationally. But he said, get a resolution. It doesn't cost any money if you're organized. Develop a resolution, have the governor, have both houses of the state of Michigan and the governor willing to sign it. So how is that going to take place? It's not because some outsider is coming in. It's because you come in, your representatives, people who buy into the just third way and who study it. Make sure that if there's anybody who says there's something wrong with it, good. Let them tell us what's wrong with it. And believe me, I haven't heard since 1965 anybody pointing out what's wrong with it. When we got the legislation, just to show you politics. The ESOP, Kelso and I met with the most powerful guy in the Senate, Senator Russell Long, who was the son of Huey Long, who some of you may know. He was assassinated. He might have been a candidate challenging Roosevelt because he had these share the wealth clubs, but it's basically to take from the rich and give to the citizens. But he was assassinated because they thought he was going. Some people thought he was going to be competing with Roosevelt for the 1936 elections. And anyway, and then Russell comes in, his son. And so we met with him, who I thought for different reasons would never back it. And he looked at Kelso's first book, thumbed through it. He told us one of his aides, set up a meeting with Kelso. I want to meet with these people. So Kelso and I met with Senator Long, and we got the ESOP into legislation. He said, well, what about other citizens? He says, I'm not ready to go on that. Okay, so he said because he had members of the family who were rich, and they did nothing in life. And so he wasn't ready for the big picture. And so he said, he asked who's against it. We said, you had Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize winning economist from the University of Chicago. And then you had Paul Samuelson, another Nobel Prize winning economist. We said to Kelso, you know, I really don't care who's right. This is right, but what are you people doing about it? And I said, well, we got a bill here. We need somebody who will turn it into law. He says, you bring something to me the next day. And so that became the employee stock ownership plans. Would have been dead without him. But the interesting thing about this is that Russell Long, you know, I never contributed to anybody's political campaign. He took us out to dinner in one of the most expensive restaurants in Washington. Kelso was staying at that hotel. And after about a 3.5-hour meeting with him, he picked up the check. Okay? That's the kind of politician you need. We became friends. I mean, he wouldn't let us, because he saw something, and that's the kind of leader we need. He's honest. He really wants to do what's right for America. And he disagreed with his father. He said, you know, my daddy was a Robin Hood populist. But he wasn't going to do that. But he liked the Kelso idea because it's principle.
Perhaps you could now talk them through, because we're trying to show the system.
Yeah. Okay, here is the method. Now, you look, there are 7 boxes, but I'll describe what goes on. You know, everything starts with the government. Number one, government is going to create an allotment, figuring out how much per year will be available to every citizen. Let's say that's only for citizens in the beginning, would be citizens for a few states that are willing to be ahead of the curve. And once you get that, once you get Michigan, California, Connecticut, Kentucky, others are going to come in. West Virginia are going to come in. Puerto Rico, it needs this kind of thing. But they said you set up an allotment. How much capital formation is needed for the state of Michigan, including infrastructure, including new companies that would develop, so that every citizen of Michigan would have, let's say, $7,000 allotment. You go to the bank looks, what do you want to buy? You get advisors, you get professional advisors who tell you, no, don't get this one, get that. And it's similar to the people who sell you insurance today, or they sell you plans for retirement. Okay? So you'd have that advice. As I say, the banks would make money. They do what they were originally supposed to do, make credit available for new capital formation. But in the past, it was always based on, do you have accumulations? Do you already have property? Why? Why does the bank ask for that? Because the bank says you need collateral, right? They'll tell you can't get a loan without collateral. So Kelso said, wait a minute, there is an answer to that called insurance. You see, capital credit insurance. So it wouldn't cost the citizen, it wouldn't cost any one of you any money, but you'd be able to go in and get your $7,000. Every member of the family would get their $7,000. You'd have something to invest in the infrastructure or other productive enterprises, but this would be public sector is what interests you. But you can't do the public sector without realizing it's important to help everybody have new jobs. Just as Henry Ford came in with innovative technology. And that's what made Michigan one of the fastest growing states in the Union. Okay, so it starts with, let's see if I can, right here. Pardon?
So
Well,
there's
that's
actually
okay.
a key.
Okay, it starts with the government providing what the money would be, the allotment for each citizen of Michigan. And then number two, let me look at
You know, thesis.
it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, one of the things about this flow chart, even though it may not have as many little markings as some, it is complex. And so what we did is we have a key here.
Yeah, steps for
Yeah,
financing.
so I would suggest. using
Number
that.
two, the company, whatever group, would now say, okay, we will issue you stock to provide us the money to buy whatever capital they need to get into operation, whether it's infrastructure or it could be for goods and services for the world. And so they would agree on the number two to sell those shares on condition that the citizen would have the money. Okay, so number three, the company itself would guarantee the bank will pay out fully all the profits. Any profits, in other words, anything that comes in as proceeds for what you're delivering to the customers, whether it's so that's where for infrastructure you'd have to get it from the citizens in the county because they want it. And then for national stuff, you'd have to have a national operation for the super highways, let's say. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And then now the bank looks at it and then says, okay, I got to get it insured, and here would go and apply for the insurance, and the insurance, capital credit insurance, would guarantee to the bank that will cover any default that may. So they just pile it in, and they got a pool of money to be able to cover the losses to the bank. Okay, and then number let's see, you got 4.
You went to 5.
No, we're 5. Okay. Oh yeah. Then the capital homesteader.
Okay, so which one? 6?
It's 4.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Yeah, 4 is where the capital homesteader goes in, and under the law, they talk about bills of exchange. If you look at the Federal Reserve Act, that's what we're talking about. He promises, he points out that out of the income, that the dividends that I get in the future, I will be able to pay the bank back. So that's a bill of exchange. The lender looks at it, says it's fine, and so now he agrees to make a loan, and then 5 is okay.
Just use the key.
Oh, here, I'm better off without this. Okay, you got an insured loan, then 7 is, so now you got an insured loan, the bank agrees to the loan, makes a deposit account, a checking account where you can then buy the shares. Now you go, but then they would take these guarantees that are now in the bank's hands. They would bundle all of these and take them all to the Federal Reserve. That's only if they want to use the power of Section 13 of the Federal Reserve Act. So the Federal Reserve would supply the cash to the commercial bank. The commercial bank would then number 10, the commercial bank the loan would be made. Then the capital homesteader, the citizen, would take it and now purchase the shares. This looks technical, but each step of the way is critical to making it into a practical way of doing it. And then the company now has the cash and buys all of the capital, whatever working capital needs and what's needed to buy whatever buildings they need and machinery or tools that they need in order to get underway or expand the company from whatever it was doing before. Let's say the market expands, they have a way of financing it by this whole process. And now you have, and then after it's all done, after these steps are done, then the company presumably is going to be generating profits, and they have already guaranteed that the dividends will flow down to the account of the citizen, and then in the dotted line or dashed line, they pay off the bank, and then when they pay off the bank would then take that cash. You go to the Federal Reserve, and they eliminate that money, that increase in the money supply, or they reissue it for new programs, new expansion programs. So that's the way the money, we're saying, that is what a buddy system should be doing, making it possible for it to be a tool of every citizen. Right now, 1/10 to 1% of Americans can use that tool for continuing the control. Or if you look at the world population, there's so few people in the world that control the money supply. Now, you could say, oh, we can't change it. I say, you can't change it, just as people said you couldn't eliminate segregation. How is it done? Or we had Polish Solidarity, for example. They published our stuff and translated it into Polish before the Soviet Union collapsed. So the Polish Solidarity movement in Poland were using our ideas. 40,000 copies, weren't they? Something like that. 40,000 copies of our materials were translated and sold in Poland at that time. They were buying it. And as I say, I know that other countries have done it, including South Africa now has employee stock ownership plans.
Right. I think the key though is really understanding money in a different way. That what holds back growth and ownership opportunity. I'm sorry. I hope people. I'm not used to using a mic. Is that on? Okay. As long as the system requires people's past accumulations to finance new growth, then all that new growth is going to be owned largely by the same people or a very small percentage of people. So what this system is looking at is how money, if you understand it not as something you speculate on and expect the value to go up or down, but just as a way of helping transactions take place, new growth and new production happen, more of a lubricant for growth than something intrinsically valuable in itself, then that becomes a way that you can finance new growth using a form of money that doesn't even exist right now, but it's all dependent on the future ability to produce and to have customers and to create profits to repay the loan.
Right.
So the system is using existing powers within our central bank system. It's nothing new. It's just Section 13, Paragraph 2. It's just not being used today in order to finance manufacturing or commercial or industrial growth.
It's important to say that Bill Gates would also be offered the $7,000 allotment if he wanted to take the time to go to the banks to do that. He won't need to do that. See, so we don't want to look at the rich as the enemy. No, we're not going to damage anything. They can continue to own what they have. Now, we might change the inheritance laws in a way that you tax the recipient, so you don't have these large aggregates. For example, Bill Gates would be able to divide it up among all the employees of the company that made him rich, or teachers, you see, or even politicians. As long as they didn't have over, say, $1 million or $2 million, when you tax the estate after someone dies on the tax over that exemption of, say, $2 million, $1 million, and that way that would reduce the amount of taxes that would have to be paid out of income taxes. But you give him the choice of either he can't take it with him, and so you give him an opportunity to spread it out to the politicians who have less than $1 million or $2 million, or you see, the idea being that, and particularly teachers and academics, because what would happen, there are a number of people who teach in leading universities at $1 a year. Why? How can they do that? they have enough capital. And so the future is to move people who who have enough capital to meet all their living to a new kind of work, the work of civilization, the work, what Aristotle called leisure work, with teaching, politics, health, you see, art, music, whatever kind of work you would love doing, and you're contributing to everybody, whatever it is. But it's only when it's not going to happen overnight. But why not move toward that as a possibility? Because you got to figure out, if the robots are taking 70 million jobs, what's going to happen to the workers and the nature of work in the future? Economics is in everything. This is a very important thing that Kelso pointed out, that if you look at all the human needs, what's called Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, the lowest need are our animal needs: economics, survival, security. Then you can, if you got that, you can then meet your social needs and your political needs. And then finally, if the education system was what it should be, teaching the truth and how to deal with new truths, you enable people to reach the ultimate of whatever kind of work that they would say, I love doing my work. You know, and because they might work in the economic sphere maybe half dozen years, not 60, not until 65, but just so you know what it takes to perform the work that robots and artificial intelligence and the energy systems would be able to do to replace human work. Economics is the lowest order, but we must meet that. It's the urgent needs, not the most important. Because what's most important is each one of you and each one of the people in your family and each one of your friends who you think should have power and don't have power. That's why I believe that Detroit, Wayne County, and Michigan should be the first state that gets a resolution, and we'll go into that. That's third.
One of the most complicated parts of how these ideas will become realized is, as we mentioned, understanding where the money's going to come from. And you have to think of it in a system term. And one of the things about money is the way we're talking about it is not simply the currency that you have in your wallets or your checking accounts. The key to understanding how this works is understanding that business contracts promise to deliver value and to be paid for it that is a form of money itself. And it's actually a form of money that most economists don't recognize in what they call M1, for example, the amount of money in the economy. And if, in fact, there's a lot of money that's being created that is not recognized as formal money, which is the ability to, what are called bills of exchange or promissory notes. If business is creating money right now, just in order to transact toward their ordinary business, then you could take that concept to extend the system of promises so that more people can, in fact, there's a lot of money that's being created that is not recognized as formal money, which is the ability to, what are called bills of exchange or promissory notes. If business is creating money right now, just in order to transact toward their ordinary business, then you could take that concept to extend the system of promises so that more people can be connected with the processes of growth in business. When they go, for example, to a bank to get a loan. What our system is talking about is basically irrigating money that's going to be needed to bring new production into reality that will be repaid with future profits versus using past savings that are borrowed for a big business project and are repaid, and basically keeping the same people owning the new wealth. So what we're talking about is there are different forms of money that occur under the system we're proposing. One starts with the businesses promise to deliver goods and services. If you, the capital homesteader, will take your credit allotment and you'll purchase our shares, and there are certain qualifications with those shares, then as we have profits, we promise to pay them to your account, which will be paying off the loan to the local bank. The key here is that in order for the business finally to buy equipment, it needs more than just the form of money in a promissory note. It needs it in cash, a form that will circulate. So the role of the local bank is, that's one stage. It's taking the promissory notes, these contracts, business contracts, determining whether these are really going to work or not, or are they trustworthy. And then in order for the citizens to come into this loop, they are going to take this, what's called the bill of exchange, and then they have to turn it into cash or currency. And that's where the central bank comes into this whole equation, the regional federal reserves, which were set up to create money if the economy didn't have enough savings. So what we're talking about takes several levels of understanding what's going on in the production process and how you can fit a citizen into this process, give the business what it needs to grow, it needs the capital. It's looking for investors, and this is a way of turning every citizen into being an investor on borrowed money, repaid with the profits of that company's, the production that it's able to sell. So because this is not easy to, it takes a while to digest the overall system and how it relates also to the tax system. I think there are two things that I would recommend. In the packets we handed you, there's a diagram how you finance green growth through citizen accounts. And after that page, there is a key of the steps that occur. So I think that will be helpful to you. The other thing is, I would say, this is giving one example, which we would say is really what the ultimate that we're aiming towards, so that citizens can become owners directly versus through trust. We're also, we can mention some other vehicles which could be very appropriate for any area that needs to develop its real estate, its land. It might have natural resources. And so that's another a vehicle that could be used with the same form of financing. or there's other forms such as even yes.
When you're done, just have a
Okay.
question.
Yeah, so.
It'll be on that point when you're done.
Oh, good, okay. Well, what I was going to suggest is we open it up to your questions, because I think that's going to be easier for us to break this down than giving the whole system. Yes.
So I had two questions. Now, looking at this, the advent of cryptocurrencies and blockchain had not been developed. When you started writing this, have you given any thought into how that can play a role? I got one more after
I
that.
think that's a great question. There was what was the magazine? Scientific American had an article on money. And in it, there were a couple of people involved at MIT who were involved in the blockchain technology. And they were recommending not Bitcoin and the various ways of creating that, because there's no, it becomes a commodity. You're trading the Bitcoin and hoping that the price of the Bitcoin will go up, but it's part of the gambling game. But they recommended, instead of a Bitcoin, a trade coin. Okay? So that, we've been trying to get in touch with these two people at MIT to see whether or not, you see, I can even see a global currency now that you don't even need, so anyone in the world would be able, you'd be able to track all transactions and an account. Everybody could have an account, and then you would have a global money, and that would enable every human being, every citizen of the world, let's say, to become an owner. But I think America has to say, America is the place to begin the discussion of that, and to bring in these people from MIT. And I'm trying to do that through some of the people who are committed to the climate issue.
Right, and I think we should also add, Norm was mentioning, the ability to track all these millions and billions of transactions that will occur under this system, because you got the businesses, you got the individual citizens, you got the local banks, you've got the regional Fed, and all this stuff has to be in balance. That you have to know you've got a good capital project that's going to be repaid,
and the system's going to be regulated.
Right, and so the blockchain actually makes this system even more doable.
Yeah.
Now, what they call a trade coin is, if we understand this correctly, is different than Bitcoin because they mean for it to be asset-backed. So when we talk about asset-backed money, it may start with the backing of a contract that says we have the customers waiting to buy. If we get the money to invest in this equipment, then we can guarantee we're going to pay profits and pay off the loan.
But that's for measuring what's going on globally. But you still need some way of relating locally to the citizen. You see, to go through what the commercial banking or cooperative banks can do. So we met with the president of what's called the National Cooperative Business Association. They have how many thousands of
they
co-ops?
have in the U.S. 20,000 co-ops, which include cooperative banks, cooperative insurance companies, and these are the sort of enterprises that this system, it needs that.
Yeah, but we met with her and gave her our books and so on, and she said that the biggest problem is money. We have that solution for her.
And the other thing, the Citizens Land Development Cooperative, are you going to get a chance to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. That started in East St. Louis. And we were, Bucky Fuller had designed the new city that he called Old Man River City. It was a domed city. He even had something, I was working in Harlem in '68 after the riots there, after King was assassinated. But I found a person there, a woman, Ennis Francis, who was another great hero of mine. But anyway, Bucky, I tried to get, I had Kelso come into Harlem and gave lectures, and then I contacted Bucky, and I said, can you help? And he sends me an article that he had written for Esquire magazine on how to build a new Harlem. It was really sensational, but they never could raise the money, even though you had all of Central Harlem was organized into 5 separately incorporated neighborhood boards, not only with adult representatives, but youth representatives, okay? And so I was brought in when by the first person who organized that, Roy Wingate. And Roy was the #2 guy in the Citizens Crusade Against Poverty. And he was listening to me, and finally, when the riots occurred, he said, Norm, come on in, I want you to speak to the Central Harlem Council, both the adult and youth representatives. And he was he was a labor lawyer, he became a judge, and he was Adam Clayton Powell's chief executive when he was in Congress. And Roy was a good guy, but he invited me in, and I started raising questions in my presentation. I said, anybody here own those buildings that have been burned down? Hearing silence. I said, any of you going to own the buildings? We're going to replace those? Still silence. And so Roy is sort of a middle class guy, you know. He got nervous. Well, you're not, you know, it's something. And then his chief aide, this woman, who was the economic development person in the Central Harlem Council, and Ms. Francis, a great leader, recognized. She said, no, you keep going. I want to hear this. Anyway, we got her. She was so excited about these ideas that she ran for vice president of the state. There was something called an ownership campaign in New Hampshire primaries. And the students at the University of New Hampshire, they loved her. She was really something. But she died in 1980. It was the election of 1980. And so you lose people, and nothing happened. But before that, she testified before the House Ways and Means Committee, a very eloquent person. She came out of the old Garvey movement, you know. So she became very close again. Now in East St. Louis, Bucky designs a new city, and it had the political leader there, another woman who was a civil rights lawyer, Yvette Young, and Dawn went in 1995, 96. She was asked to go to Carbondale by one of the professors there who was close to Bucky Fuller. Fuller had died around 1980. And it was a woman named Yvette Young. Terrific. She loved these ideas, and I worked with her for years. I used to go into East St. Louis and talk to the citizens, and we developed a plan. And all of this there's a lot of literature on it. And you have a copy of the article that appeared on what we were planning to do. She had me, she arranged for him. She was probably #2 or 3 person leader in the House of Representatives. So she said our idea was every citizen turn the land over to the citizens in the form of what she called a citizens land cooperative, and so we call it now Citizens Land Development Cooperative, because she liked the word cooperative. And so we got it through the Illinois House without a single negative vote. So it looked like it was ready. All we had to do was get it into the Senate. Everything was fine. We brought in these people from the NASA power technology people with the new energy system, clean up the brownfields and set up a new energy system that would be partially owned by all the citizens. They would own the land, they would have the money necessary to hire the best architects and engineers and land planners and so on. Not in the government, but in the people, okay? And then they, and of course, we had, everything was fine until she died, 1980. And then you get people going all over the place. And the ownership thing, they left that out. See?
I think what would be helpful though is to just describe
What it does.
what the Citizens Land Development Cooperative is.
Yeah, it's a legal tool in which would be set up as a development organization made up of every man, woman, and child would have a single lifetime, non-transferable, voting and dividend-bearing share in that land. So that when the new companies, including this energy company, was formed, they pay rents on the land that they want to use. So that'd be a form of income for the citizens, as long as they were, the permanent residence was there. You could do that here, same thing. And that way, you're really saying the citizens are the ones who should have the power. It doesn't eliminate the government. And when she died, we had people in East St. Louis, and each of the members of the 15 surrounding communities, small communities there, they all were supported because this was going to be what was called Metro East, right across the river from the Arch. Yeah.
St. Louis.
And here, East St. Louis, the location was fantastic because you had the Mississippi River. Today, the only industry that's is the Casino Queen, the gambling casino. But you see, if we had done that, there would have been, East St. Louis used to be one of the great manufacturing centers in the country. They had it at one time. Now it's almost dead.
Has anybody proven concept with this? Has anybody proven concept with this? Has this been tried anywhere?
No.
No.
That's one of the reasons we're here, so that you know about it, because the design is still there, and the potential for building new industries is there, but it's only the land we're looking at now. So participation in land. Why? Because the government shouldn't be the owner, should be the people.
So it doesn't sound like it's too difficult. It sounds to me similar to a community land trust.
Yes.
But what you're doing, community land trust, they kind of get away from monetizing the value.
And it's
Here you
non-profit.
want to monetize
Yes.
the value
Absolutely.
and basically provide a dividend
Absolutely.
to the residents.
Yes.
But it seems like it needs to be in a very finite area or only be participated within a geographic boundary versus what I'm hearing something very large. But you could actually do a pilot on a very small area to prove concept.
It's good.
Exactly.
It's good, but then it would be the citizens in that area. Sure,
Right.
you can do that, but you might think, well, why only? Yeah, but any way you start.
Yeah. I
The
think
important thing is the concept
Yep.
and show that it can be proved.
Yep.
You're right.
Right, and I think just to show how scalable it is,
Yep.
you want to find an area that if you develop the land, you would be able to generate enough profits and businesses that it would, be viable. If you're too small, like in a neighborhood, it's not going to be adequate. But it can be the size of a city like Detroit. It could be statewide. And it really depends on how you aggregate land and the ownership of land in such a form that rather than government owning the land or a few individuals owning the land, that you have a corporation set up, for-profit corporation, in which that owns the land, but the shareholders are each of the citizens within that geographical permanent residence. And as you want to try to attract as much business to come in, because as Norm was saying, they pay leases and
So let me give you an example. So right now, we just finished up the Little Caesars Arena. In the city of Detroit, a close to $1 billion deal. So if you were to say just incorporate into the Citizens Land Development Cooperative, the land, allow Little Caesars to do what it will, make it generate its revenue, but they are just guaranteed to make a rent payment. And so the rent payment is what gets distributed to the citizens. So you monetize and you don't impair the ability for the team or the developer to generate its revenue. It just pays a reasonable rent.
That's right.
And the citizens
Exactly.
are the beneficiaries
Exactly.
of that rent. And so they don't own the land. They have a long-term lease.
Oh.
They feel comfortable that the banks feel
Yeah, the
comfortable.
business, right.
Development keeps going, but the citizens are able to realize, I guess, an annuity, a dividend,
exactly.
or just a payment.
Exactly.
Exactly, and also, they would be more connected to decision-making within that area, because as a shareholder, you're also supposed to have the right to vote for at least your representative to a board, and to have them accountable to each of the citizens as well.
And they'd be able to hire people, professionals.
So this isn't meant to be, amateurs, operation here. You want to get the best, right?
So I'm very interested in that portion, and I've got to go. But I would like to talk more about that and talk about the ability to do a pilot, maybe
Sure.
somewhere in the
Love
city
it.
or the region. So
Love it.
just
Anything.
let us know that.
You see, and since you're going, anything you can do to get some of the leadership in Detroit to be willing to get beyond the Section 3 is what you do. As I say, if you focus on the importance of getting a leadership group in Wayne County and Detroit who can convince the leadership, which I know is Republican here, the governor and
At the state level.
and at the state level, to agree to a resolution that would benefit the state. And that's why I'm saying, if you focus on the whole state, they have to listen to you.
What I'm going to suggest is it doesn't have to be the state. I wouldn't go to the state. I don't like to have the state into my business as a municipality.
Okay,
But the municipality, I mean, we have vehicles where we can do this ourselves. We have DDAs, we have tax income and finance authorities where we can have the control without having the state get into our business. Because typically they come in, they break it, and they give it back to you and blame you for breaking it. I much rather do it myself and control at the local level. So I would love to talk more about that. David, thank you for making this happen. I really appreciate the invitation as well.
Let's use this as a chance for a quick 5-minute break. We'll go into session 3, and then I can pass out the planning meeting that's going to take place in June. So let's break for 5-10 minutes, and then we'll get into session 3. Thank you.